So hi, my name is Lorella and I work with people with a high level of sensitivity in their feeling realm. So this might look like a high level of intensity in the body when you have feelings and emotions, like a lot of contraction and intensity when there are feelings, like quite a lot of bracing, quite a lot of overwhelming feelings, and a lot of like holding in the throat to kind of keep the crying and the emotions down. And it also might look like when you hit shame, which if you have a high level of sensitivity in the feeling realm, you probably hit shame quite often. That when you hit shame, like there is like an overwhelming agitation in the body, that it's really hard to stay in your body. And it doesn't just happen for an hour or two, it can happen for days, 3 days, 5 days. That was my experience. So there's a thing about feelings that, like, it doesn't matter how much work you do. If you have this kind of like sensitivity in your body, it doesn't matter how much therapy you do, it doesn't matter how much meditation you do, something about the core of it never seems to change. And in fact, it might even get more intense. So what we normally do is we normally think that we must be so broken, or that we must have so much trauma, or we mustn't be working hard enough, or we must just be so crazy, because it does not change. And we can sense that not everyone feels like this. So we just negatively attribute that to our brokenness. And we live in a culture that says to us that having strong feelings is bad, that it is an indicator of your trauma. And we keep looking into our childhoods to make connections and to understand why we experience ourselves like this, or what is so broken about us. And we keep trying to resolve it. So I'm just going to show you a little map of Buddhism that kind of like helps you understand what I mean by feelings, because there is a big difference between emotions and feelings. So what we see in this map, which is a very central map in Buddhism called the Five Skandhas, is it breaks down the experience of ego, this very solid sense of self, into 5 building blocks. And what these maps do, which is just wonderful, is that they help us look for and feel for experience that would otherwise be outside of our awareness, because the process is so fast and feels so real. But these maps get taught very differently depending on the tradition that you're in. There are different schools of Buddhism. So when I was playing with this map for the first 20 years in a more masculine expression, much more intellectual and theoretical, it never came to life. But when I got taught it within a Tibetan tantric somatic practicing lineage, then this was a much more feminine and energetic and somatic expression. And my teacher at the time, Neil McKinley, who was very humble, expressed it in a way that really allowed me to actually meet my feeling body in a completely different way. And it was really like, why hasn't anyone taught me this map in this felt sense way? So here I'm also illustrating it in the hope that it will come to life for you a little bit more. So the first one is the skandha of contact. So this is where our 6 senses, which includes thinking, makes contact with experience. And this is a co-arising. So it's our senses making contact with the world. And the second one is feeling. So feeling here is vibration, it's sensation, and it has a tone that is either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So these energies and sensations are moving within us and through us and around us. So both contact and feeling are happening in the unconscious. We're not actually aware of them until we start to get a map like this and feel for our experience. So the third one, which is perception, the initial part of this is actually happening in the unconscious as well, which is again really important. And what I loved about this map being taught this way was that you start to get a sense for something is threatening or not threatening. There is actually this sense of, as soon as this feeling arises in your body, that you like it or you don't like it, or this sense that something is wrong. So I absolutely loved having this broken down this way, because it really allowed me to drop under the story and just relate directly to feeling. So then we move into formation, and this is where it really is within the conscious realms. And this is where we branch out into our particular grooves, into our character, into our habit, and where it is much more about this life, what has happened in this life, and how we've kind of built these neural pathways. They have the movement of emotions, the intensity of emotions. They have the memories attached to them, and we label. If we are with our experience and we know what's going on, we are in the land of formation and labeling. Feelings, on the other hand, are vibrational, and when we are with feelings, we don't know what we're being with. So if we feel a feeling that feels threatening, then we'll branch out into very particular pathways for us. So we walk into a party and we might get a vibe that people don't like us. We get this feeling that feels unsafe, and we might collapse, or we might go into our people-pleasing mode, or we might get defensive, or we might just freeze in the body, or we might leave. So there are ways that we branch out into so many deeply habitual pathways from particular energies. And here is where we are really doing a lot of our therapy. We are feeling into our experience, like getting memories, making meaning, making connections here. So the fifth one is consciousness, and this is my particular consciousness. It's basically this aggregate is kind of, it pulls together the other four building blocks into this incredibly solid sense of self. So here is where we go into, this is actually what is happening. You said this, you meant that, I feel this, I know. It's got this like real intensity to it, and this strength of absolute certainty of what is going on. And we can't feel how much the unconscious feelings and our unconscious perceptions are actually influencing our direct experience of what we think is going on. And this is really important because they are influencing us so much. And what are feelings? It's really good to note here that we also are deeply influenced genetically. It's, look at the science of epigenetics, that it's encoded within our DNA. So they say that it's trauma. We inherit the trauma of our ancestors, or do we inherit their feeling body and their movement away from feelings? There is neuroscience that says that we come in with 400 established psychological traits. And again, in Buddhism, there are maps that are saying not only do we come in with this false sense of self, this false sense of separateness, but we also come in with these imprints in our consciousness of movements towards feelings, away from feelings, blending with feelings, not knowing, like the neutral vibration. We don't even know when we're in that. And how much of these feelings are ours? How much of them are collective in this co-arising? So there's so much to look into here, but what we do know is that we have so much judgment on the feeling realm. Usually we're blaming others. We have beliefs in our spiritual systems that believe that they are the cause of our suffering, in our psychological systems that they are the indicators of trauma, and we're trying to look for the original cause in our childhood, which is pretty interesting. And more than anything, we blame ourselves for having them. So what's really important here for a feeler is that you kind of like start to get this awareness that not everybody is feeling their feeling body or the movements of these unconscious sensations at the same level as you do. And what I mean by it's important for you to get is that if you don't know this, you keep thinking that your awareness or your ability to feel them means that you're broken. That if you feel like this, then there is something wrong with you. And what I'm trying to convey to you is that you're sensitive to the movements of unconscious energies, but you are negatively attributing them to yourself. You're pulling them in as there must be something wrong with me. And when you know that not everybody can feel that, then you're not comparing yourself to everybody else. They must be so confident, or they've worked through their stuff, and I'm just here crippled in my shame and my unworthiness and my anxiety, and I'm just going to keep working on myself. You might start going, oh, I can just feel this stuff more. So here's in terms of visually, I'm just going to represent this. So someone who doesn't feel their feelings, their sensations are kind of more subtle, even though it's intense if they're in meditation, or they might spike in them, but they kind of close down again. Whereas for feelers, it's just these channels are just open the whole time and the volume is so intense. So in terms of therapy and meditation, we feel into our feelings to get insight. So in terms of therapy, you feel into the story, you feel into the body, you start to make sense and make these connections down into your childhood, and you start to get understanding and a certain level of stability. And in meditation, you feel into these feelings, you kind of put them into the hindrances of what they are, and you feel them in your body, and you feel their impermanent nature, and you see how they kind of impact the field. And so you kind of stabilize your awareness into the absolute and into the calm, and you slowly kind of unravel your perception, but your kind of connection to the defilements. In Buddhism, these feelings are called the three poisons. So you can already see in the languaging how it's sort of the way that we experience that or receive it is that there is something wrong with these energies. So for someone who's a feeler, what you've internalized is there's something really wrong with you. This is really important to get. So feeling into our feelings helps us get insight, and feeling into our feelings helps us see the impermanent nature. But if you're a feeler, feeling into your feelings is like pouring petrol onto a fire, because we already can feel our feelings so intensely. So what the maps of tantric somatic practice gave me that I hadn't got anywhere else is when you get down to this level of working in the keel, is that you have to completely shift your habit of attention. If you don't learn to rest deeply into the calm, then these feelings are too strong for you to take in. So because you can feel the feelings, this is excellent in terms of navigating these unconscious waters, because you can actually sense what's happening, and you can sense what happens immediately when you start to take your attention off them and rest into the calm, not to get rid of them. This is the central piece here. We are resting into the calm in order to help them settle, so that we can welcome them in a deeply receptive body. When we get this deep and we learn to relax and stay open and soften our gaze and not look at them and receive them as echo, then what we are doing is we are opening the receptivity for these energies they settle enough because they start to trust us, and we can receive them in a body that is so open with the volume so low that it doesn't activate that perception of threat or non-threatening. Like, it just doesn't activate it. It starts to receive these energies beneath the layer of perception. So if you have this level of sensitivity in your feeling body, then you're actually able to like feel when it's at a distance. You can feel when there's sensitivity, and then they move into you, and your sensitivity down here is actually heightened because you're sensitive. This is where your curse becomes a gift. But if you keep relating to your experience negatively, then this doesn't open. And you have to sort of start to get that you have to learn to navigate this level of sensitivity, and feeling into something isn't going to work. The other piece that's super important, I'm just going to mention briefly, is that you cannot have the mind down here. If you have any sense of what you are meeting, it's all vibrational. If you have a sense of what you're meeting, if you have a name to it, if you have a kind of bracing against it, if you have a fear of it, if you have any relationship to it, you are in your recreation. You are not meeting this as new. So if there is fear, if there is dislike, if there is moving away, if there isn't deep calm, then you're up here at perception and formation. So that's really important. So more than anything, there's two things in this video. One is, if you're a feeler, it's wonderful. And I know it's probably the first time you might have even heard that because it's such an intense experience. But when you start to learn to meet it, even just at the beginning of like looking for calm, it's just such a relief, because we've been trying to fix them and get rid of them and heal them for so long. And that's an intense experience because it is fighting. You're fighting your present moment. And the other one is that these feelings aren't what we think they are. How can they be anything other than divine energies? But it's really easy to see how we don't like them, because we've been moving away from them for so long and we've hated them for so long. So to do a 180-degree turn towards them and welcome them is incredibly different and courageous, and takes a totally different approach. Welcoming, kindness, deep relaxation. So I think that's enough for now. Thank you for your time.